Hello, welcome to ResoCoder. In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to store multiple variables on the cloud by using JSON strings together with Google Play Games services. We're gonna be writing some new code, but we are also gonna modify the code from the previous tutorial in this series. I'm also not gonna explain the principles behind using saved games from Google Play Games. This means that you really need to watch the previous tutorial if you want to get something out of this video. So as you can see, I've made a simple UI which will display 3 integers. Let's assume that they are high scores for various difficulties in our game. We need to create an array inside our cloud variables script which will hold these 3 integers. So we want to open up our cloud variables script. And for now we want to leave this high score over here because otherwise it would throw us a bunch of errors because we are using this high score all over the place in Play Games script. So we want to add public static int array, important values, and it's gonna be a property. Because we have 3 integers to display on the screen, we want this important values array to be 3 elements long. We could normally do this by just assigning a new int with the length of 3 over here, but it will throw us an error because feature auto property initializer is not available in C#. We would need to use language version 6 or greater. So because Unity is so slow in updating to newer versions of C#, we need to create a private void awake method, and inside it we need to initialize important values. So important values equals new int with the length of 3. And now because we've made this change that we are initializing inside an awake method, we need to put this script on top of some game object. And manager is a good candidate for that. So we need to drag cloud variables onto manager game object. Next up, we want to open UI script and we can delete all the code from the previous tutorial. This script basically contains all of the methods which will be called from the UI. So after we deleted all the code from the previous tutorial, we can create a public text array, value text array, which we will set up from the Unity editor to contain all of the text that displays null now. Alright, so now once we have that, we can go and write public void update all, which will update all texts. And inside it we want to write for int I equals 0, I is less than cloud variables dot important values, which is our array, dot length. And we could obviously also use the length of this array, but it doesn't really matter over here. And then I++, so we want to increment I. And for each cycle of this loop, we want to update the value text array on the index of I, and we want to get the text. And we want to set it to cloud variables dot important values at the index of I, and we want to convert it to string. Now we want to write public void save, and obviously this is just gonna save everything to the cloud and locally. So playGamesScript.instance.saveData. And if you haven't already, I really urge you to watch the previous tutorial because you aren't gonna get anything out of this tutorial otherwise. And it's really worth it because you're gonna learn so much about saved games. And now the last method inside this UI script, public void increment, and it's gonna accept an integer index, and inside we wanna set cloud variables dot important values at the index of index, and we wanna increment it obviously. And we also wanna update the value text array, so we can copy this line of code, paste it in here, and change I for index. Now it's time to set up all these buttons to call appropriate methods. And now comes the most exciting and important part. We are gonna write the code responsible for converting our array to JSON string and vice versa. In this tutorial, we are gonna be using a free plugin called Boom Lagoon JSON to help us with the conversions. You can easily import it to your Unity project from the link in the description of this video. Or you can also go to Asset Store and just search for Boom Lagoon JSON and you should find it pretty easily. We want to create a new C# script and call it JSON util, We can delete these start methods and update method. It also doesn't need to derive from mono behavior. And we can also delete these two using statements. And we don't want to delete the using system.collections. We also need to be using boomlagoon.json and using system. We are gonna be using generics so that this code is gonna work with any collection of any type, not just an array containing integers. Although generics may seem intimidating at first, well, I know I was scared when I first saw them, they actually aren't difficult to understand. As of recording this video, the tutorial on generics is not out yet, but in the future when I make such tutorial in my Learn C# course, you will be able to see a little thing pop up on the top of the screen. So if it's there, click on it and you will learn more about generics. So let's get to it. Public static string, collection to JSON string, and not an array because really we can convert any type of collection to JSON string with this approach. And now comes the generic parameter, so t, and this method will accept t, array, r for short, and string JSON key, because everything that's inside a JSON string has a key, and we need to supply the key at which the array that we are converting should be located inside the JSON string. And this JSON key should be consistent across all of your game. So when you once call this method with JSON key containing my key, you should always call this method with JSON key of my key. And now comes the part where we use generic constraint, where t implements ilist, and all of the collections that I know implement non-generic ilist. So we can use this method collection to JSON string with any type of collection, even the generic list, normal arrays, and I don't know what else, but basically with anything that is a collection, we can use this method to convert it to a JSON string. And in the body of this method, we want to write JSON object, JObject, and by the way, this is the JSON object from boomlagoon.json namespace, equals new JSON object. And we also want to create a JSON array, JArray, equals new JSON array. And now we want to add stuff to the JSON array, so we want to iterate through this generic array. For that we are going to use for loop, so for int I equals 0, I is less than array r dot count and I plus plus. And inside this for loop we want to write JArray dot add, which adds an element, and we want to add new JSON value, and the JSON value should contain our generic array, so r, at the index of I dot toString. Awesome, and now we want to add this JArray to this JObject. So we will write JObject dot add, and we need to specify the key, which is JSON key, and JSON value is actually this JArray. And now all that's left to do in this method is that we want to return JObject to string. Cool, that's awesome. And now we want to write the method for converting JSON string back to array. And this method is also gonna utilize generics. So public static, this is gonna return array of type t, again generic, and it's gonna be array. And it's gonna be called JSON string to array. And the generic type parameter is t, obviously. And this needs to be to array and not to collection, because you cannot just instantiate some kind of ilist. When you want to create an object, you cannot create an object of an interface. We could obviously also convert JSON string to generic list or to something else, but in this tutorial I think that array is more than enough. And this is gonna accept string JSON string, also string JSON key, and also func with type parameters as follows, so string and t, and it's gonna be called parser. What this func delegate is going to do is that we are gonna supply a method to this method, so we are gonna be actually utilizing functional programming, and we do not want to put semicolon over there, obviously. So we are gonna be utilizing functional programming so that we can pass a function which is gonna parse the string to type t. And inside this method, we also want to create a JSON object, JObject, but this time it's going to be equal to JSON object dot parse, and we want to parse the JSON string. Now we want to create also the JSON array, JArray, and this is going to be equal to JObject dot get array at the key of JSON key. Then we want to create the converted array of type T, so T array, converted array, and it's going to be equal to new T JArray.length, because we want this converted array to be of the same length as the JArray, obviously. And now for int I equals 0, I is less than JArray.length. We could obviously also use the converted array.length, but that doesn't matter, and I++. And now we want to set the converted array at the index of I to be equal to parser, which is our func delegate, which we are actually passing a function into this method, which is really cool. So parser, and the string that we want to supply to this parser function is JArray at the index of I. We want to get the string from this element, and we want to call toString on that element. And then we obviously want to return converted array. So that's totally cool in my opinion. And after all of this, now comes the time to finally edit the playgame script from the previous tutorial. Playgame script is responsible for communicating with Google's servers to store our cloud variables on the cloud and also locally. So we want to open up the playgame script, and here we are setting the local save to a default value when the game is played for the first time on a particular device. But the default value is now not 0, but rather string.empty, which is also this, but I am rather gonna write string.empty because it's much more clear what that means. Now we want to go to the method onSavedGameDataRet, and here we are also setting cloud data string to be equal to a default value when there is no data in the saved data byte array. And so now the default value is also string.empty. And that's all that we need to do in this method. Now, all the way up over here in the gameDataToString method, we want to return JSONUtil, which is the class that we've just written, which contains all of these generic conversion methods. So JSONUtil, and we want to convert collection to JSON string, because we want to return string. And the collection is cloud variables dot important values, and the key is, for example, my key, but what you put in here is totally up to you. Now we want to go to the string to game data method, which accepts only one string, local data, and this overload is used when there's no internet connection. And we can delete all of this, and we want to check if local data is not string.empty, so when it's not default value, because otherwise it would throw us a bunch of errors if we try to convert such string to a meaningful game data inside our JSONUtil class. So if it's not empty, we want to set cloud variables.important values to be equal to JSONUtil.JSONString to array. The string is local data, key is my key, and it's really crucial that you always use the same key. If you want to store multiple arrays inside your JSON string, then obviously you need to use multiple keys, but for one array, only one key, because otherwise you're not gonna get it. And now we wanna write the parser function, and which is gonna be simply str, so string, some kind of string. This doesn't need to be str, this can be x, but for clarity it's better for me to write str. And we want to parse str to int, so int.parse str. So that's cool, and now we want to go to the string to game data, which runs when there is a connection to the internet. On top of this method, we also want to check if cloud data is empty, and if it is, we want to call the method string to game data, which accepts only local data. So we actually delegate all of the work that this method would need to do to its overload, which accepts only local data, because when cloud data is empty, it just doesn't make sense to continue in this method of comparing and checking if one data or the other is more up to date. And after that method executes, we want to set the isCloudDataLoaded boolean to true. And then we want to return because we do not want this method to run anymore. And if this if statement didn't stop the execution of this method, we want to create an int array cloud array, and it's going to be equal to JSON string to array. The JSON string is cloud data, key is my key again, and the parser is str int.parse str. As simple as that. Now we also want to check if local data is empty, and if it is, we can set cloud variables.importantValues to be equal to cloud array, which is already initialized to contain the proper values. So cloud variables.importantValues equals cloud array, because there is no point in comparing an empty local data string with all of the different data that's in the cloud array, because obviously local data is never gonna be more up to date when it's empty, and it would also throw us a bunch of errors. We also want to update the local save to be equal to the cloud save, so playerprefs.setString, add the key of save name, and we want it to be equal to cloud data. We also want to set isCloudDataLoaded boolean to true, and we also want to return. Now if it is first time that the game is played on the device, we need to check for all of the values inside the arrays. So we need to write a for loop for int I equals 0, I is less than cloud array dot length, and we need to change the check inside this if statement. So we want to check cloud array at the index of I is greater than local array, also at the index of I. Well, and that's embarrassing, I haven't created a local array yet. So we need to write just below this check if local data is empty, int array local array is equal to the same thing as the cloud array. The only thing that we need to change is change this cloud data to local data. Alright, now this if statement is good to go. Because if only one element in the cloud array is more up to date than some element in the local array, the whole cloud save is more up to date than the local save. This obviously works only with something like high scores. For other data, you would need to implement something like store the time of the save and then check if the time is greater and all of that stuff, but I'm not gonna go into this, but it shouldn't be really all that hard. Then there is this else clause, and inside here, we also need to create a for loop. So for int I equals 0, I is less than cloud array dot length. And inside this if statement, we again want to check if local array is greater than cloud array. And if local array is more up to date, we want to set the cloud variables dot important values to be equal to local array. And we can delete this add score to leaderboard because this is not gonna work, because this tutorial is solely about saved games. And all the way down here, we want to set cloud variables dot important values to be equal to cloud array. And now all that's left to do is to update this resolve conflict method. Basically what we need to do under this parsing comment, we need to change the integers to arrays. So we want to create two integer arrays, int array, original array, and it's gonna be equal to this, which I've just copied from the code that we've written before. We just do not want to use cloud data over here, but rather original string. Similarly, we need to create an int array, unmerged array, and it's also be equal to this line of code. We just need to change cloud data for unmerged string. Cool, now we want to put this if statement inside the for loop. So again, good old for loop. For int I equals 0, I is less than original array, dot length, and I++. We want to put this thing inside this for loop. And instead of original num, we want to check for original array at the index of I, and also unmerged array at the index of I, and we want to do similar thing down here. And that should be it. I want to remind you that if you want to get the code written in this tutorial, you can do so from resocoder.com by clicking on the link in the description. Now let's test if everything works first in the Unity editor. So we are gonna launch the game and we press on refresh. Everything is 0. Now we increment first, increment second a few times, and increment third also a few times. And now we press on save. We stop playing and we again start playing. Nothing is here, but we click on refresh and all of the data is restored. We add 4 or something, we add something to the first integer. We press on save, stop playing, start playing, refresh. All right. And now we add 3 to the third element. We do not press save, but we just stop playing. And the third element is not equal to 10. It's equal to 7 because we didn't save the last time, which is totally the correct behavior. Now let's build an APK by going to File, Build Settings, Build. And I am using an awesome emulator for Windows and Mac called Nox, and you can check it out from the link in the video description. Alright, so we've just logged into Google Play Game Services, and when we press on refresh, a thing appears because I was preparing obviously beforehand, because believe it or not, I am really preparing for these tutorials so that you can watch the best quality videos. But when we increment the third element, it increments to, for example, 20. We press on save. Alright, and now it's saved locally. So obviously when I come back and when I press on refresh, it's gonna be 20. But if we were saving only locally, when we delete the app's data, and clearing of data happens when the user uninstalls the game or obviously when he installs the game on different device. And what would happen is that the local data is completely wiped. So now we are relying on the Google Play Games servers to supply us with the correct data, which is up to date. So let's hope for the best. So we are again logged in, and when we press on refresh, this contains 20, which is totally correct, totally cool, and everything works as expected. And if this tutorial helped you, please give it a like and also share it with others. Subscribe to this channel if you want to know about my new videos, and if you really don't want to miss anything, hit the bell button. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, follow me on social media, and see you in the next video.